A scene was filmed. It was finished. Then it vanished. No trailer showed it. No DVD mentioned it. For over 50 years, fans of Jeremiah Johnson have asked the same question. What was cut, and why does no one talk about it? Some say it was too dark. Others say it was too real. The studio never gave a clear answer. And that silence is exactly what makes this story impossible to ignore. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This isn't clickbait. This is a mystery that's been living quietly in Hollywood archives for decades, waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. And when you start looking closer, you realize something strange happened to one of cinema's most respected films. Something that nobody wanted to explain. Jeremiah Johnson came out in 1972, and if you've seen it, you probably remember it a certain way. It's quiet. It's beautiful. It's the kind of film that moves slowly, like a man walking through untouched wilderness. The story follows a drifter who leaves everything behind, civilization, people, comfort, to live alone in the Rocky Mountains. It's a survival story, sure, but it's also about something deeper. It's about a man finding peace in nature, finding himself. But here's where the mystery starts. A small group of film historians notice something odd, not in the movie itself, but around it, in early scripts, in old behind-the-scenes notes, in photographs from the set that didn't match any scene in the final film. These weren't movie buffs imagining things. These were serious researchers who knew how to read the archives. And what they found didn't add up. There was a scene that never made it to the final cut. Not trimmed for time. Not edited out for pacing. Removed completely. Deliberately. And nobody ever talked about it again. Think about that for a second. We're not talking about a boom mic in the corner or an actor flubbing a line. We're talking about an entire scene that someone decided had to go completely and permanently. No explanation. No public discussion. Just gone. Now, in 1972 Hollywood, when studios cut scenes from films, they usually told people why. The pacing fell off. Test audiences didn't respond. The director changed his vision during editing. These are normal reasons. These are reasons studios share freely, especially decades later when there's nothing left to lose. But this scene? Different story. No interviews mention it. No production notes explain it. When film scholars track down crew members decades later and ask about it, they get strange responses. Hesitation. Vague answers. Evasion. One crew member, when directly asked about deleted scenes, paused. Said the scene wasn't meant to be talked about. Then changed the subject immediately. That's unusual. Why would someone feel uncomfortable discussing a detail from a quiet Western film about a man in the mountains? Why the caution? Why the pause? These aren't the reactions you'd get from someone keeping a harmless secret. These are the reactions of someone who knows something they've been told not to share. The deeper people looked, the more it seemed intentional, architectural. Like this wasn't just one editor's decision. It felt like a studio-wide choice. Someone up high made a call, and that call was enforced. Every trace of this scene was supposed to disappear. And here's the thing that really gets interesting, it almost worked. To understand what that missing scene might have contained, you have to go back to the source material. The original scripts, early drafts of Jeremiah Johnson, tell a heavier story than what we see on screen. Not entirely different, but shifted, darker in some places, more emotionally raw. The film we know today is meditative and measured. The early pages? They had sharper edges. According to film scholars who've studied these archived scripts, there was a moment in the earlier drafts that felt more intense than anything that made it to the final film. Not violent, not gratuitous, just emotionally overwhelming. The kind of scene that forces you to sit in discomfort for a while, the kind that lingers with you. Some believe the scene dealt with grief directly. In the finished Jeremiah Johnson, there's a pivotal emotional event. Something tragic happens to the main character, but it happens fast. The camera moves past it quickly. There's barely time to process it. Film scholars have pointed out that the pacing around this moment feels rushed, like something's missing, like the full weight of what happened was never allowed to settle. If that missing scene existed, it would have shown that tragedy in complete detail. It would have forced audiences to sit with Jeremiah's pain, to watch him actually feel the loss instead of moving quickly past it. Now here's the question that matters. Why would that bother people? In the early 1970s, films were getting bolder. Directors were pushing boundaries with raw, realistic storytelling. Think of the films that were coming out, gritty, honest, willing to show hard truths. But studios were still nervous. They still worried about how much emotional weight audiences could handle in a slow-burn Western. A scene that dwelled too long on tragedy, that showed a man breaking under loss, that made the viewer uncomfortable, that might have felt like too much for general audiences in 1972. But here's what's strange. The decision to cut, it wasn't just about pacing or audience comfort. Because if it was, the studio would have said so. They would have explained it in interviews, defended it. Instead, they chose silence. That changes everything. Was the scene removed to protect the audience? Or to protect the studio from something? Was the missing moment so emotionally powerful or so honest that someone decided it could never be discussed? That even acknowledging its existence would raise too many questions? The more you think about it, the more the silence makes sense. Not because it's necessary, but because explaining it would mean admitting something nobody wanted to admit. Every mystery has a moment. One person who almost says too much. For this story, that person was a crew member. Someone who actually worked on the film. Decades after Jeremiah Johnson was released, long after everyone involved had moved on, someone interviewed this crew member about deleted scenes. It was a simple, casual question. The kind of throwaway trivia question you'd ask about almost any classic film. Were there scenes cut from the final edit? And something happened in that moment. The crew member paused. You can feel it even in the written record. A hesitation. A moment where they had to choose what to say. They answered, "It wasn't meant to be talked about." Then they changed the subject. That's it. That's all they said. But those words are everything. Think about the implications. A crew member, 50 years removed from the production, still felt like they shouldn't discuss it. Still had caution. Still understood that there was a boundary they weren't supposed to cross. That kind of loyalty or fear, or both, it doesn't fade naturally over 5 decades. It's maintained, reinforced. The question becomes, who reinforced it, and why? Some people believe that missing scenes showed something that would have fundamentally changed how audiences viewed the main character. Not in a scandalous way, not something that would ruin the film, but something that would make him less heroic, more vulnerable, maybe even difficult to root for. Studios in the 1970s were extraordinarily careful about how leading men were portrayed in big films, especially in westerns. The western genre had very specific expectations. A strong, silent type, a man of principle, someone audiences could look up to, a legend. If a scene existed that cracked that image, that showed Jeremiah failing, doubting, struggling with something more than just survival, it could have felt like a threat. Not to the film's quality, but to its appeal, to its marketability. A leading man's weakness shown on screen and allowed to breathe? That was risky in 1972. Still is, honestly. And if that's really what happened, if that's really why the scene disappeared, then the crew member's hesitation makes perfect sense. They didn't just witness a creative editing decision. They witnessed something that the studio decided couldn't exist, couldn't be acknowledged, couldn't be explained. That's not just a cutscene. That's erasure. Most classic films embrace their history. They lean into it. Anniversary editions, director's cuts, restored versions with bonus features, behind-the-scenes interviews. Studios love telling these stories, especially as films age into legendary status. Jeremiah Johnson is a genuine classic, respected, revered, the kind of film that doesn't need hype or resurrection because it's never really died. It's always been there, waiting for people to discover it. And over the decades, audiences have returned to it, critics have reevaluated it, filmmakers have learned from it. It's the kind of film that should have had extensive anniversary treatments, retrospectives, oral histories, the full archive treatment. But on one subject, this missing scene, the studio went silent. Not just initially, not just for a few years, while things cool down. 50 years. Silence for 50 years. Think about what that means. Jeremiah Johnson became a cult classic. It survived in people's memories. It influenced filmmakers. It's been restored in high definition. It's been written about extensively. It's been celebrated as a masterpiece of quiet cinema. Through all of that, through every opportunity to tell its story, there was no official mention of this missing scene. No statement. No revelation. No lost footage special. Nothing. That's not normal. Usually, studios love turning mysteries into marketing. A deleted scene reveal, especially from a beloved classic, could have been a major selling point for an anniversary release. A reason for people to buy the new edition. A fresh story to tell about a film everyone already knows. But instead, nothing. Silence. Complete avoidance. This pattern is rare. And when it happens, it usually points to something specific. Something someone decided was better left undiscussed. Sometimes that's about protecting people. Sometimes it's about avoiding legal issues. Sometimes it's about respecting decisions that, even years later, studios don't want questioned. But here's what makes this case particularly interesting. Jeremiah Johnson was based loosely on real events. The early 1800s frontier. Real mountain men. Real survival stories. Real history, dark and brutal and unforgiving. The original historical accounts that inspired the film, they included details the final movie completely avoided. Violence, cruelty, the actual brutality of frontier life. Things sanitized for the 1972 screen. What if that missing scene was closer to the real history? What if it showed something that actually happened, something dark and true, and the studio decided 1972 audiences weren't ready to see it? In that case, the scene wasn't cut because it was a creative mistake. It was cut because it was honest, too honest, and the studio made a choice to control how much reality audiences were allowed to witness. That changes the entire story. It's no longer about a studio hiding a scandal. It's about a deliberate decision to shape a narrative, to decide what truth gets told and what truth stays buried, and then to never explain that decision. To let people wonder forever. 50 years later, we're still wondering. And maybe that's the real point. This mystery isn't really about one missing scene anymore. Not really. It's about what that silence reveals about how stories get shaped before they reach audiences. Every film you watch is a curated version of a much bigger story. Scenes are cut for time, for tone, for emotional pacing, for politics, for reasons you're never told. Jeremiah Johnson succeeded because of its quiet, respectful tone, its measured approach to survival and loss, its refusal to sensationalize. If that missing scene had stayed in, if it had dwelled on grief, shown weakness, confronted darker realities, the entire emotional balance would have shifted. The film might have been heavier, more uncomfortable, less commercially friendly, maybe less of a masterpiece, or maybe more of one. We'll never know. Because someone made sure we never could. What's strange, and what keeps this mystery alive, is how it survived without becoming mainstream. No tabloid headlines, no viral exposés until recently. It lived quietly, in fan forums, in old interviews, in forgotten archive notes, kept alive only by people who refuse to stop asking questions. That's how the best Hollywood mysteries survive. Not through big leaks, but through small, persistent curiosity, through people who notice the silence and decide to listen to it more carefully. As restored versions of Jeremiah Johnson circulate again, as people revisit this classic, that missing scene might finally get noticed. Not the scene itself, that may be gone forever, but the gap it left, the space where something important used to be, the question that nobody officially answered, but everyone who looks closely can feel. What was too powerful, too honest, too real to let audiences see? That question might be the only answer we ever get.